The cobblestone streets of Paris glistened in the fading light as I dragged my suitcase through the narrow alleyway. The address scribbled on the crumpled paper matched the elegant facade in front of me, a weathered building adorned with ivy and wrought iron balconies. I hesitated for a moment, soaking in the surreal feeling of finally being here. The door creaked open before I could knock, revealing Julien. His face lit up with an easy smile, the kind that made you feel immediately at ease. "You must be Sam," he said, his voice warm with a lilting French accent. "Welcome home." Julien's confidence contrasted sharply with my awkwardness as he helped me carry my bags up the spiraling staircase. His energy filled the space, a small but cozy apartment with mismatched furniture, books stacked in every corner, and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. Over the next few days, Julien's charm was impossible to ignore. He was effortlessly charismatic, quick with a joke, and unapologetically himself. We shared meals at the tiny kitchen table, swapping stories about my first time in Europe and his childhood in Lyon. I learned he was a painter, his art scattered across the apartment, bold, chaotic strokes that mirrored his personality. Though I tried to stay reserved, Julien had a way of peeling back my layers. One night, after a long day exploring the city alone, I returned to find him waiting with 2 glasses of wine. "You can't just see Paris," he said, handing me a glass. "You have to feel it." That night, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights, I started to feel something I hadn't anticipated, a pull toward him. There was an unspoken connection, a quiet understanding that existed in our shared silences. His laughter lingered in my mind long after we said good night. Yet, there was something beneath Julien's charm, a flicker of unpredictability I couldn't quite place. He would sometimes disappear for hours, returning with vague explanations and an unreadable expression. I brushed it off as part of his artistic temperament, but a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that there was more to Julien than he let on. Despite my hesitations, I felt safe with him. That is, until one night, after I had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a day of wandering Montmartre. I awoke briefly to the faint sound of movement, Julien's shadow passing through the dimly lit room. His actions seemed innocent enough at the time, but the way he lingered near my bedside left a strange unease in my chest. I dismissed it, chalking it up to my own overthinking. Still, as I drifted back to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Julien was magnetic, yes, but was I being drawn too close to something I didn't fully understand? The thought clung to me like the scent of the city's rain-soaked streets, both intoxicating and heavy, leaving me wondering what secrets lay beneath Julien's beguiling surface. The air in the apartment was thick with stillness, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the balcony. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me that evening, and I collapsed onto the couch, surrendering to sleep without much thought. It was a restless slumber, punctuated by fleeting dreams and muffled sounds that seemed to come from the edge of consciousness. When I stirred briefly, my senses were clouded by the haze of half-sleep. The soft creak of the floorboards reached my ears, followed by a shadow moving across the room. It was Julien. I barely registered his presence, thinking he was retrieving something from the shelf near the couch. Yet, something about the way he lingered felt off. His footsteps slowed as he approached. My back was turned to him, but I could sense him standing close, too close. A faint rustle, like the shifting of fabric, stirred unease in my chest. My eyelids fluttered open, but I remained still, pretending to sleep. I heard the faint click of a phone camera. My stomach dropped. My heart pounded as I fought to keep my breathing steady, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Why would he take a picture of me like this? The thought was a splinter, sharp and impossible to ignore. My trust in Julien, the bond we had been building, now felt fragile and fractured. After a few moments, Julien retreated to his room, the door closing with a soft thud. I stayed frozen on the couch, the weight of what had just occurred pressing down on me. Questions swirled in my mind, each one more disorienting than the last. Was it harmless? A strange joke? Or was it something darker, something I didn't want to name? Morning came too soon, and the light filtering through the curtains did nothing to ease the tension in my chest. Julien greeted me in the kitchen, his smile as disarming as ever. He poured me coffee, chatting casually about his plans for the day, as if nothing had happened. His ease only deepened my unease, making the gap between us feel wider than the Seine itself. I wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in my throat. What if I had imagined it? What if I accused him and shattered everything we had built over a misunderstanding? As Julien left the apartment that morning, I found myself staring at the closed door, the silence of the room amplifying my doubt and suspicion. My mind replayed the sound of the camera click, each repetition eroding the foundation of trust one had once felt so secure in. I knew I couldn't let this go unanswered, but fear and uncertainty held me back. The question gnawed at me, refusing to let go. Who was Julien behind the charm, behind the laughter, behind the moments that had felt so genuine? The betrayal was undeniable, but its full weight had yet to settle. And deep down, I wondered if I was ready to face the truth when it finally did. The days that followed were a blur of unease, the once comfortable rhythm of our lives disrupted by an invisible fracture. Julien remained his charming, unbothered self, while I struggled to act normal. The memory of that night haunted me, the faint click of the camera echoing in my mind. I could no longer tell if his easy laughter was genuine or a carefully constructed mask. It all came to a head one rainy evening. Julien returned home late, his hair damp and his jacket slung over one shoulder. I was waiting in the living room, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and trepidation. "We need to talk," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He paused, his expression unreadable. "Of course. What's wrong?" The words tumbled out before I could second-guess myself. "That night, you took a picture of me while I was sleeping." "Why?" For a moment, his face was a canvas of shifting emotions, surprise, guilt, and something I couldn't quite place. "You were awake?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's not the point, Julien," I snapped. "Why would you do that? Do you know how invasive that feels?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair as he sank into the chair across from me. "It wasn't what you think," he said, his tone defensive. I was inspired. You looked so peaceful, so raw. It was a moment I wanted to capture." Inspired. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. "You violated my trust for some fleeting artistic whim?" Julien's eyes softened, and for the first time, his charm seemed to falter. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't think. I should have asked. I'm sorry." His apology hung in the air, heavy with regret, but it did little to quell the storm inside me. "You don't do that to someone you care about, Julien," I said, my voice cracking. "You don't cross that line and expect things to stay the same." "I care about you more than you know," he admitted, his gaze meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Maybe too much. That's why I did it. I didn't want to lose that moment." "I didn't want to lose you." His words threw me off balance. Was this a confession? A deflection? Both. My mind raced, torn between anger and the undeniable pull I still felt toward him. "I don't know if I can trust you any more," I finally said, my voice barely audible. Julien nodded, his expression pained but understanding. "I'll earn it back if you let me." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. I didn't have an answer, not yet. But as I watched him retreat to his room, his usual confidence replaced by something fragile, I realized this wasn't just about trust. It was about whether love could survive betrayal, and whether I was willing to find out. The apartment felt emptier in the days that followed, even though Julien and I still occupied the same space. His laughter, once so vibrant, was now replaced by a tentative quietness. He gave me distance, and yet his presence lingered like a shadow in the corners of the rooms we used to share with ease. I spent my days wandering the streets of Paris, trying to reconcile the person I thought I knew with a man who had crossed an unspoken line. Memories of our time together came unbidden. His contagious laughter over wine, the way he'd tilt his head when he listened, the light in his eyes when he talked about his art. It was these moments I missed most, but they felt tarnished now, tinged with doubt. One evening, Julien approached me as I sat by the window, staring out at the Paris skyline. The soft glow of the Eiffel Tower illuminated his face, and for a moment I was reminded of why I had been drawn to him in the first place. "I've been thinking about what I did," he began, his voice low and steady. "You were right. I broke your trust. And I hate that I hurt you." I turned to face him, the weight of his words settling in the quiet space between us. "Why did you do it, Julien? And don't tell me it was just inspiration." He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Because I was scared," he admitted. "Scared of how much I felt for you, and scared you didn't feel the same. That night, seeing you so vulnerable, I realized how much you mean to me. But I didn't know how to say it. So I did something stupid." His confession was raw, unpolished. It stripped away the charm and left behind a man grappling with his own insecurities. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice trembling. "You made me question everything. About you, about us." "I understand," he replied, his tone laced with sincerity. "But I hope you'll let me prove that I can be better. That we can be better." For a long moment, I said nothing, staring at the skyline as my thoughts swirled. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Yet, despite everything, a part of me still cared for him. A part of me wanted to believe that people could change, that mistakes didn't have to define us. "I don't know where we go from here," I finally said, meeting his gaze. "But if there's one thing I've learned in Paris, it's that life is complicated, and so is love." A faint smile crossed his lips, bittersweet and hopeful. "Complicated," he echoed. "But maybe worth it." As we sat together in the quiet glow of the city, the future felt uncertain, but it was ours to decide. Whether our bond would heal or fade, only time would tell. But for now, we had this moment, a fragile truce in the city of light.